I'm really excited to introduce our speaker tonight, Marty Cagan. Marty Cagan is the author of 3 leading product management books. You're probably familiar with Inspired. The one on the left is the first edition. The one in the middle is the second edition. And usually when you write a new edition, it's only a certain percentage of the book that gets rewritten. But Marty basically rewrote the whole book, so it's as if it's a second book. And then I'm excited that today his new book, Empowered, is coming out, and we get to celebrate the launch with him here today. And this is actually Marty's 5th time speaking at Lean Product. He's the person who spoke here the most. We've had a wonderful tradition of having Marty here every year, and so really excited about that. In fact, I want to welcome Marty to the 5-Timers Club. Marty, welcome. For those of you familiar with SNL, you might know what that joke's all about. So I want to give Marty a proper introduction. He is the founder of Silicon Valley Product Group. Before that, he was Senior VP of Product and Design at eBay. He was a Vice President at Netscape as well. And before that was a developer at Hewlett-Packard. He's the author of the books that I mentioned, including Empowered, which came out today. You can learn more about him at svpg.com, and his Twitter handle is @Cagan. So he's going to be sharing his advice on product leadership is hard. So without further ado, Marty Cagan, I'm super excited to have you speak.
Thank you. All right. Well, and thanks to everybody who connected. I'm with Dan. I do really miss the in-person experience, and Dan knows I consider his meetup kind of, even though I actually have spoken at meetups all over the world, product meetups, Dan's is the one I consider kind of my home meetup. He's been doing this for a long time, and I know a lot of the people that come each year, and it's just so I really appreciate that. But it is really nice that that we can reach people all over the world now, and of course, so all things considered, I guess that's a pandemic silver lining. But anyway, I am. And because of the fact that we have this annual tradition, we decided, this would be our virtual launch party. And so I appreciate everybody joining for that. So, and my purpose in the talk today is really honestly, my purpose is to try to convince you to read the book. I will warn you, the book is not a minor book. It is, came in at over 400 pages. It is a big topic. And in fact, some of the backstory on the book, I have always felt for my entire career, very strongly about the content that's in this new book, Empowered. However, I also believe that it was the kind of thing I needed to sit down with the head of product face to face and a whiteboard. It was one of those things where it's really hard to talk in detail about vision and strategy and team topology in general terms. And so the way I would do this is, that's my work, is really advise the leaders of product organizations. And I felt good about doing that on a one-on-one. The bad part was it is totally not scalable. And I realized that what happened really was Dan was describing kind of the history with this second edition of Inspired. The second edition, it had a bigger publisher and it sort of got distribution all over the world, but it brought me into a lot more companies. And one of the things I realized was that there was no way I was going to be able to sit down with all these leaders and talk to them about what they need to do, that we needed some better way to share those practices. And so it motivated me to start what became a 2-year effort. I didn't know how long it would really take, but it was a 2-year effort to kind of put this down in a way that I felt could apply to the vast majority of tech product organizations. So what I wanted to do is kind of give you like 100,000-foot view of the book, talk about what the major topics are, why they're there, and frankly, why product leadership done well is hard. And so hopefully, this talk will probably either scare you off or hopefully motivate you to really dig in to the book. And and parts of the book, I'll warn you, parts of the book are pretty hardcore when you get into the details of team topology and the details of team objectives and product strategy. Is non-trivial work. It's not the kind of thing that makes for an easy, one of the things that I felt good about with Inspired is it's really a bunch of techniques that I share, and I can describe each technique in a few pages. So many people have told me they felt it was a very readable book. I think this is going to be a harder one because the topics are harder. But I did have a set of people that I worked with, leaned on to really help me get these things good. And so I'm excited for people to see it. People are starting to read it now, and that's what's great. So with that, I don't need to spend time on, on my background, because I think Dan already shared that. I also don't want to spend a lot of time talking about why empowered product teams are good, because I don't even think you'd have signed up for this talk if you didn't already believe that. Most companies do believe that empowered product teams will consistently outperform feature teams. The harder question is not, are they better? The harder question is, how do we move to that? How do we actually change? And that's hard. And that's really what the topic of this topic is. But I do want to make sure we're on the same page when we talk about, when we say something like, where this is all about empowering product teams. So just to summarize this idea of a real product team, in contrast to feature teams or delivery teams, a real product team exists to serve our customers in ways our customers love, of course, but then work for our business. Now, that might sound obvious to you, but of course, in most companies, that's not how it is. Most companies that aren't very good, I should say, it's not how it is. In those companies, the teams exist really to serve the business. They are there to serve stakeholders. They are often set up literally with that charter to serve the business. So that's really the primary distinction between a true product team and a feature team. But there's more differences as well. Product teams are given customer or business problems to solve. Sometimes they're both. It solves a problem for the customer and for the business, but it's at least one customer or business problem to solve. Again, as opposed to in a feature team where you are given features to build or features or projects to build. That's very different, and honestly, unfortunately, much harder to solve problems rather than implement features. And of course, we know why this is a problem, because many of those features are not going to solve the problem, the underlying problem. So this leads really to the next points, which is in an empowered product team, they are allowed. It's not only that they are allowed, this is their purpose, is to go figure out the best solution to that problem. So if you're assigned a problem, let's say a churn rate is too high, or onboarding time for a new customer is too long, or any of these, or conversion rate's not enough, or we don't have product market fit, any of these problems, then you are told, figure it out, as opposed to, here's your roadmap, implement it on time, on budget, maybe the best you can hope for. But as far as you can't be held accountable in that model where you're given a roadmap. If the features on that roadmap don't actually solve the underlying problem, whose fault is that? I mean, what's going to happen is a lot of finger pointing. I would argue it's the fault of the person who put it on the roadmap, which is usually some stakeholder or executive, or in an enterprise B2B company, some underwriting customer. Unfortunately, and of course, you can't go to them and say, oh, that you're the reason it failed, because they'll just say, well, your engineers did a crappy job, or your design is bad, or you don't know what you're doing. They'll blame it on the team. But fundamentally, you cannot hold a team accountable if they are given the solution rather than told to figure out the solution. So first and foremost, that empowered product team this is what it means to be empowered. They are told, you then go figure out a successful solution. What does that really mean? That's discovery. That's product discovery. Figure out a solution that works. Now, what does that really mean? It means it's valuable, it's usable, it's feasible, it's viable. And once we've done that, we deliver it, we build it, QA test it, we deploy it. That's what a product team does. And again, like I said, these product teams can finally be held accountable to those results. So that's success for a product team. If you've been told to reduce the onboarding time from 45 days to 3 days or less. Once you get it down to 3 days, that's success. If you just did 50 features and you hardly move the needle, that's not success. All right, so that's what we mean by empowered product teams. And the funny thing is there are all kinds of books that make the argument for empowered product teams. And I love the books. The newest one, and by the way, I'll give a plug here. I love the book. It's a little provocative for some people. Will have a hard time with it, but I loved it. It was written by the co-founder of Netflix, Reed Hastings. The book is called No Rules, Rules. And it is a full-on business book aimed at CEOs, all describing the virtues of empowered teams. Frankly, even more generally, of empowering people. It's and there, Netflix sets the dial on empowered product teams all the way to 10. And some other companies set it quite high as well, I would argue. But Netflix is definitely high. They go far out there. And if you read the book, you'll see some of the things they do that are really a little more symbolic than anything else, but they are trying hard. They made a huge bet on empowered product teams. Anyway, that book on Netflix's sort of culture and how they do product is just the latest in a long line of books that make the argument that this is what great companies do. Amazon, Spotify, Google, Apple, there are books on all these, and they basically make that argument. What none of them do, and this is true really with the No Rules Rules book, none of them really tell you how to do that as a product organization. So what I wanted to do is share that. And by the way, I am sharing with you Netflix techniques, with Google techniques. None of these techniques are my techniques. These are the techniques that I have watched those companies use to very good effect for many years. And for those of you that have heard me give maybe some other talks, this is kind of the thing that keeps me motivated in all this, is that the difference between how the best companies work and how most companies work is honestly, in my opinion, it's not only big, but it's getting bigger. The delta between Amazon and Netflix and your average company is only getting worse, not better, which I think is crazy. That's another talk about why they do this. But anyway, my world is companies that either already know this is how they need to work, or they realize they have to go work like those companies, and they want to know, how do we do that? So that's really what this book is aimed at. All right, if that's our goal, to have these empowered product teams, what I really wanted to talk about is how we do that. And again, this is a huge topic, so we're going to keep it at a high level to fit in less than a few days of nonstop talking. So one of the fundamental things that so many people don't understand, I see people make comments on Twitter all the time about this, and I could tell they're just naive. They are so naive. They think the way you get empowered product teams is that you get the managers to back off. That's sort of the standard answer: back off, give us room. And unfortunately, what they don't understand is, in an empowered organization, you don't need less leadership. You need better leadership. And it really is true. If you look at the product leaders at a Netflix or at an Apple, and you compare them to the product leaders at your average company, whether it's a bank or insurance company or whatever, you will see a dramatic difference. And it's not just, I'm not just talking intellectual horsepower. I'm really talking about the role they play for their company. So this is a really important point. And the sooner you understand this, the better. A lot of times when I meet a company and I'm trying to coach their senior team, I will explain what I'm about to explain to you. I'll explain the responsibility of leaders. And it's amazing how shell-shocked the leaders usually are. They can't believe, first of all, they usually tell me the job they're doing now is nothing like what I've just described. So they're not even close to trying to do it. But the next thing they say is, and it's so hard. How do I learn how to do that? So it's a much harder job. If you think about it, in most organizations that have feature teams or delivery teams, the so-called product leadership, and to be clear, when I say product leadership, I mean the managers and leaders of product management, managers and leaders of product design, and managers, leaders of engineering. That's the sweet spot right there. Those people in a feature team organization, they're really facilitators. They're really there to kind of make sure that as much of the stakeholders' needs get met. And okay, I mean, that's necessary, but it's really a facilitator versus what we're going to talk about is, I mean, it's just black and white difference. So let's keep that in mind. It's not about less management or leadership. It's about better management or leadership. Many of you know Andy Grove, or know of Andy Grove. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but he's considered, you know, pretty much the most legendary CEO in our industry. And he was actually the guy that came up with OKRs, by the way. And I think he would roll over in his grave if he saw how so many companies were using them today. I'll talk about how he intended them to be used in an empowered product organization. But yeah, there's a million great quotes from this guy. He was quite the leader. But I love this quote. What gets in the way of good work? There's really two things. The first is that people don't know how to do good work. The second is they do know how, but they don't want to. They're not motivated. And really those two categories are kind of how I break up the world as well. I don't always phrase it exactly that way, but you'll see that pretty much fits. So the first big obligation of leaders is managing. Now, you probably know there's, I'm using this term leaders a little loosely here, all these different, you know, a director of product management, a first level people manager is not the exact same job as a chief product officer or a chief technology officer, obviously. But what's really different there is the blend between management and leadership. If you're a first level manager, you are almost all management. By management, that's primarily coaching and staffing, as I'll talk about here. So realistically, if you're a first level engineering manager, first level manager of product managers, about 80% of your time is staffing and coaching if you're in a good product company, and you'll see why. And maybe 10, 20% of your time is on the other leadership activities. But as you move up the organization, that ratio flips. So a chief product officer, chief technology officer is more like 80% leadership and 20% coaching and staffing. So the blend will adjust, but those are for all the leaders in product. Those are the two major things, managing and leading. So let's talk about the first, coaching and staffing. And I talk about this first, honestly, because this is the most important. And in fact, when companies tell me, when I meet a CEO that convinces me they are serious about transforming, I'm like, okay, that's critical, but what will really make the difference are your first level managers. If your first level managers are not capable of hiring and coaching the right people, it's a house of cards that collapses. All right, so this is number one. Many of you know Bill Campbell. I actually dedicated the new book to Bill Campbell. He also passed away a couple of years ago. He was known as the coach of Silicon Valley. He was literally the guy that coached many of the top leaders in our tech industry. And yeah, lots of great quotes from him too. This is one of my favorites. Coaching is no longer a specialty. You cannot be a good manager without being a good coach. Just to be clear, he told that explicitly to hundreds of leaders at Google, at Apple, at Amazon, specifically that. So you need to realize coaching is not a minor activity. It is one of those things too, that in a good company, it's one of those things I consistently find in the good product companies, coaching is one of the most important things they know they need to do. Yet in most companies, it's not even like on a top 3 list. When I ask a director of product management, what are your priorities? It's not even on the top 3 list. So there's a huge disconnect there. So anyway, when I say coaching, what I'm really talking about is making sure you as a manager are doing an assessment of every one of your employees. And this is true on every member of a product team, whether it's a product manager, designer, engineer, data analyst, data scientist, user researcher, product marketing. Every member of these product teams should have at least one person who is committed to helping them get better at their job. And the most basic thing they do is assess the person, figure out their strengths, their weaknesses. I remember still, the person who was coaching me, I was unusual in the sense that I was an engineering manager at the time, and I wanted to learn product. So my manager, who was an engineering director, said, I can't teach you product because I don't know it, but I will arrange for somebody to coach you on product. And they found a guy who's amazing. He had spawned several different divisions at HP, and he agreed to coach me. But it's funny, after our first talk, he was like, okay, and by the way, I was doing products for developers, and I had already been a developer for several years. So I felt like I knew something about our customers. He's like, you don't know anything about your customers. The first thing you need to do is get out of the building. And he sent me on, he arranged it actually, a couple phone calls to the sales organization. He said I wasn't able to make a single decision until after I had visited 30 customers, 15 in the US, 15 in Europe. And it took about 3 weeks. It was an intense 3 weeks. It was actually my first business trip of my career. And it was a life-changing event. I learned that developers are not the same. There's many different kinds of developers, and the ones we had in our little bubble at HP were not the ones we were selling to. But of course, he knew enough to know that that was going to be the case. He also quizzed me a little bit on the analytics and decided I didn't know anything. I was blustering, and I could maybe tell him what lifetime value was in theory, but I couldn't define how it was calculated. So he arranged time with me with a finance person so that I could learn how these KPIs were really computed and what they meant. So thankfully for me, otherwise it would have been the world's shortest, product career. He knew enough and cared enough to tell me honestly, like, these are areas that are major holes for you, Marty. You need to do these things, learn these things before you can be entrusted with a team. But I was willing to do that. I was anxious to do that. I was happy to have somebody who could tell me what these things were. So anyway, he created a coaching plan for me, and I did my side. I mean, I remember him telling me, as long as you're willing to do your side, there's no reason you can't learn this stuff. And I did. I learned it, and thankfully, when I had the first executive review, I was prepared. If he hadn't have been coaching me, the executives there, and they were smart executives at HP, they would have just ignored me, and that would have been the end of that as far as product. So he made sure I had done my homework. I knew what I was talking about, and it went well. And okay, so coaching is absolutely critical. And yeah, you do this coaching plan. The one-on-one is essential. It's probably the most valuable thing you'll do with your people. You have to make sure you teach them and coach them on the industry, on the customers, on the data. You have to make sure they know the skills of modern product discovery. You have to make sure they understand the context. Now, context is a big topic we've got coming up, so I'll save that for a few minutes. All right, and many of you know, Dan just mentioned Christian was one of your speakers, which I know, and you guys, I'm glad you've had a chance to meet Christian. He is an extraordinary product leader. By the way, to tie this back to coaching and staffing, so luckily for me, I was coaching 2 companies that Christian was at, and it just immediately made a huge impression on me. What a great leader. And by the way, if you ask people who work for him, what's the best thing about him, they will tell you he's great at coaching. But I will also point out, I worked on recruiting him for, I don't remember exactly, but somewhere between 3 and 4 years. I had been working on him to recruit when it was at the right time of his career and personally with his goals, because I knew he was born to really to coach in a broad scale, and that's really what he's doing. And I love that quote of his, by the way. Every problem is a people problem. I think he's right. All right, staffing. I don't want to go into the details because most people know conceptually what's required in staffing, but in good companies, the bar for staffing is so much higher than it is in most companies. I love the quote from Bezos because I think this is, and he's reiterated this on his most recent shareholder letter. Single most important element of their success has been their approach to hiring. I really think that's true. So the main thing I like to impress upon product leaders is these things: recruiting, interviewing, hiring, onboarding. These are not HR activities. These are manager activities. Hiring manager is responsible for these things. If you think you can delegate it, that's the problem. You can't. This is you. That's why I pointed out, for many people, I've worked for years to recruit, to join the team, because I just knew that long-term, this was the right thing. I wanted to make sure that, I got to know them and they got to know me, and I would help them any way I could on their career. And eventually it's like the time is right. Okay. So staffing and coaching is the first of those two responsibilities. And really without that, nothing I'm going to talk about will do any good. The truth is. So it all depends on people. But one thing I hope you don't misunderstand, because this is one of those confusions, I think, and this is the reason for the subtitle of the new book. So many people think that if you go to a place like Netflix or Google or Apple, that you'll find people working that are just like, orders of magnitude smarter than these other lesser companies. But it's really not the case. They are very ordinary people. And I know that because so many of the people I've introduced to those companies have come from these other places. The difference is they were not in an environment where they could do good work. And now they arrive at a company where they can do good work. And so it's much more about the environment the leaders provide than it is the number of brain cells in the person or anything like that. All right. So the second part, so management we talked about, the second part is leadership. And leadership is primarily around what I refer to as strategic context. At Netflix, they just call it context. I love this quote, by the way. This is a mantra at Netflix. It's more than just a quote. It's a mantra. It's probably their most important mantra. When I said their entire company was predicated on empowered teams, this is their mantra. It actually was originated by Leslie Kilgore. Some of you may know she was an early leader at Netflix and still on the board, I believe still on the board. But the point is, lead with context, not control. Control, by the way, is short for command and control. The world where a bunch of stakeholders get together, provide roadmaps, hand them to the team. That is called command and control, where you are told what to build. In an empowered company, as NIO works, instead of telling the teams what to build, you give them the context. The context, like what's the vision? What are the problems you need to solve? What's the organizational goals? That's all context. And then the teams are in the best, this is the premise of empowered organizations, that the people on the teams are in the best possible position to figure out the best way to solve the problems. That's the idea. And that's what they mean with lead with context, not control. So what do we mean by context? And of course, context can apply to if you're providing, creating a new television series like Netflix is doing in parts of the company now, or product. Now, in the product world, this is what we mean by strategic context. There, of course, some of this, a little bit of this comes from the C-suite, from the board and the very senior leaders, like what is the mission of the company? The mission of the company is fine. It's one of those things that most organize the world's information. That's a useful mission. If anybody in your company doesn't know what the company's there for, you have bigger issues. But just because you know that the mission is to organize the world's information, that doesn't tell any particular product team anything that's useful. And so that's just a very high level part of the context. What gets a little more interesting is normally companies at the board level or at the senior level have a set of objectives. Maybe the objectives are about going international this year. Maybe the objective for a typical startup, there's usually one objective: get to product market fit. Honestly, most startups I work with, that's it. One and only one objective, because they know until they do that, everything else is academic. So the objectives, the company objectives are useful. The scorecard is useful. Scorecard are the KPIs that they look at, the whole company really should look at, but at least the leaders look at to judge whether or not something is healthy, if the product is doing well. Okay, so that's at the top level, and that mostly comes from the senior leadership team. The product leadership, especially the head of product and the head of technology, they're really, now that's where it gets interesting, the product vision and the product principles. I'm going to break these down, starting with vision in a minute. But the product vision, of course, is meant to be our shared goal for the next 3 to 5 years for software, 5 to 10 years for hardware. We'll talk more about product vision. That is one of my most important tools we have, especially with medium and large size organizations. That product vision actually drives the architecture, which isn't on here. That is a specific part of the context. It's the responsibility of the engineering leaders, but the architecture obviously plays a huge role. And it also drives the team topology. Team topology is the term. I've adopted that term. There's a book that came out a year ago or so ago called Team Topology. And I talked to the authors about where they got that term. I really liked it. And I asked them if I could use their term, and I like it. It's because we never really had a good title for this. And of course, what I'm talking about is, how do you decide to structure your product teams? How do you break up your work into product teams? And of course, if you're a early startup with less than about a dozen engineers, then basically the company equals the product team. It's not hard. But as soon as you get 20, 50, 100, 1,000 engineers, the topology is a huge topic that everybody I've ever worked with, every company, they always wanted to look at the topology, because doing topology well is really hard. And that was one of the hardest parts of the book to write about, because there are, honestly, the challenges there are so many factors to consider. And I was hesitant up until a couple of years ago to really share what other companies do, because it often needs to be so different. But today, I think the patterns and anti-patterns are much more clearly established. And so I do share a lot more patterns and best practices in the team topology section. But that is a big part of the leaders. And of course, the most important part when it comes to getting great work done is really the product strategy. So we'll talk about that as well. And the product strategy is what gives us the objectives, and the objectives are the problems to solve for the product teams. So that's what strategic context is. Besides staffing and coaching, this is what leaders spend their time on, especially on the strategy. All right, so let's go through those. Again, at a high level. The product vision, first of all, it's, remember, objectives are all the company, really. How much money we want to make, or how do we become more profitable, or how do we grow? The product vision's primary purpose is to put the customer front and center. It's really the primary thing that puts the customer front and center. So you need to talk in a product vision not about how you're going to make a lot of money. That is not what this is for. We have other tools for that. This is about how you're going to make the lives of your customers and users better. That's what this is for. It serves as the common North Star. This is a really important point. If you've got 25 product teams, another common mistake I see teams make is and I know the root cause of this mistake. It's because some people, I have no idea what they were thinking, but they created these things called vision canvases and vision boards, basically little, one pagers. And you sort of fill in the form and you have a vision. And the idea was each product team would have one of these visions. I'm like, what are you doing? That makes absolutely no sense. The purpose of a vision is to keep us all going in the same direction. If you have 25 product teams with 25 different visions, you're going to go in 25 different directions. That defeats the purpose of the vision. So the vision is meant to be, that's why it's often referred to as North Star, because no matter where you are, you've got that common North Star we can all see. And of course, we want to inspire meaningful work. We want to leverage industry trends. We want to reflect the company's values. Another thing I really like to emphasize to the leaders is this is you, if it's done well. And admittedly, a product vision is a little bit of an art form. It's less like the other artifacts we do as leaders in the sense that it's not really an analytic piece. It's more of an emotional piece. It's meant to inspire. It's meant to be emotional. It's meant to persuade. So if you do it well, it should be your single best recruiting tool. So this is what I use to recruit and have for years. Most good product people, engineers, designers, product managers, they join because they love the vision. I mean, just look at Elon Musk totally understands this. The vision of Tesla, the vision of SpaceX. People are joining because they want to help with those very, major visceral emotional problems like saving humanity. Okay. Good product people, though, can be inspiring remarkably, even with very basic things like financial systems. All right. And it also, like I mentioned before, a good product vision drives the architecture and drives the team topology. Hopefully it makes sense. I always tell the CTO, the engineering leaders, if you don't have a product vision from the head of product, don't start a replatforming effort, because there's two things that can happen. One is you decide, well, we're just going to guess, do our best to figure out where the company's going to need to go. And of course, those are very big, risky guesses. And most of the time they're wrong. And these are multi-million-dollar mistakes. What mostly happens is not that. They don't guess at what the company's going to want to do. What they do is they say, well, these are the kinds of things we need to do today. So let's re-platform so that it's easier to do those kinds of things today. And that is, and so what you end up doing is a better version of what you needed over the last 5 years, not the next 5 years. So this is really important. So if I tell the CTOs to insist that they are given a product vision before they do their new architecture. And then of course, the architecture and the vision drive the team topology, which I will talk more about in a minute. All right. Yeah, I've always loved this quote. It's a famous quote, of course, been around for a long time, about why a good product vision. But most of the time today, product visions are prototypes. You're showing a prototype. We'll often make a well-produced video showing off that prototype. We'll have a soundtrack to add a little emotion. We'll have it produced to the sense that it's powerful. That's what we want to do. Okay. So then let's talk about that team topology. Again, this is how you structure your product teams. I don't know if you can see that little in that graphic, but that's an actual topology for a medium-sized company. It's a company that I profiled in detail in a case study in the new book, which was a jobs marketplace. And so you can see employer teams and job seeker teams and platform teams. And in the case study, it describes why they came up with that particular topology, what worked well with that, what worked poorly with that. But you can see what their decisions were and why. When we come up with a topology, and just to be clear, this is not something that the head of product management does themselves. This is something where the head of product and the head of technology need to do together. You have to do it together. It's where those two come together. So first of all, what we want to do is we want to have as strong a sense of ownership as possible. We want teams to feel like they own something meaningful. We also want them to be as autonomous as possible. Autonomy, to be clear, is not quite the same as empowerment. Empowerment means the team is able to figure out the best way to solve the problems that they've been asked to solve. Autonomy says we have all the people and skills we need on our team to do what we need to do. Now, the truth is, we never have full autonomy, except in the small startups. We never have full autonomy. In medium or large companies, you never have full autonomy. You depend on other teams, but we try to maximize for autonomy. We want to minimize those dependencies. That's important for people to understand. And of course, we want to be aligned. We want to be aligned with the business, with our customers. That's why it's so common. Another quote from Netflix, when they do topology, and this quote applies to many more companies than just Netflix. When we're doing team topology, we want to be very highly aligned, but we want to be very loosely coupled. So that the loosely coupled is what gives the autonomy and the empowerment. So that's what we're looking for. Topology is a very big topic. I always try to explain there is no perfect topology ever, but there are lots of really bad topologies out there. And it's not hard to spot a bad topology. When you talk to a product team, the most common complaint you hear in a company that has a bad topology is, even when we're trying to make a small change, add just a basic feature, we have to work with 18 other product teams from around the company. It takes forever for us to do even minor things. And they're so frustrated. They feel like they don't have any control over their own destiny. They don't have any ability to make the impact they want to make. So those are all signs that they have a poorly constructed topology. So yes, this is why it's an important topic. And really every product leader I know, this is something that they care a lot about. Okay, next big topic is product strategy. This, the truth is, vision and topology and architecture, you kind of do those once every few years, somewhere between 2 years for really fast moving an organization and 10 years for a device organization. They don't change all that much. Most visions last, like Tesla's lasted 10 years each. I mean, these are long, big things. But product strategy is a living thing. Product strategy, you are updating every quarter. And so product strategy gets a lot. In a good product company, the leaders spend a lot of their time on product strategy, especially the leaders of product management. I love, if you don't know Richard Rummel, he wrote, I think, the best book on strategy called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And this is another one of those people, most companies, the truth is most companies, I don't even think it's fair to say they have a bad product strategy, because most companies have literally no product strategy. If you're a feature team organization, as unfortunately most are, if you're a feature team organization, what's your product strategy? Your product strategy is basically please as many stakeholders as possible. That's not a product strategy. That's not. You can try to maximize for, stakeholder happiness maybe, but that is not a product strategy. And a product strategy, the irony is product strategy is all, none of us have as many engineers or designers as we wish we did. And a product strategy helps us get the most out of the people we have. And yes, I have never found a strategic management tool, whether it's from McKinsey or BCG or anybody. That's not how it's done, Bain. It's not how it's done. Good product strategy is smart product leaders doing their homework. What does that really mean? Focusing in on what's really important. Studying the data, studying the qualitative learning, studying the market, studying the technology to learn what the levers really are, and then making some hard decisions about turning that into action. That's what product strategy really is. You probably remember this famous quote from Steve Jobs, but focus isn't just saying yes to the important things. It's saying no to all the things that are good ideas, but are not really going to be the things that move the needle. So product strategy is this is where most product leaders earn their salary, in truth, right here. All right. Now, the way we actually convert product strategy into action, the way we execute on a product strategy, is the output of a product strategy is a set of problems that need to be solved. Again, they could be customer problems or they could be business problems. Sometimes they're both, but they are a set of problems that, like, we need to solve this if we are going to have a profitable company, if we're going to have a successful company. These are the problems we need to solve. So that's the output of the strategy. Team objectives are how we assign those problems to product teams. Now, the most common popular technique to do that is OKRs. But OKRs, if you know, the way feature team companies try to use it, are nothing like this. That's sort of the mismatch. That's why they're so frustrated with OKRs. They have a feature team model that they're trying to superimpose an empowered team technique on. OKRs, I mean, that literally came out of Andy Grove as a way to empower his teams. It's a way to give the teams problems to solve and give them outcomes to be measured against. It's really simple conceptually, and it fits perfectly on empowered teams. It doesn't fit on feature teams. Yeah, and the basic idea, you know, is there's lots of great quotes from lots of great people about saying the same point. Don't tell people how to do their job. You know, tell them what you need to accomplish and let them impress you with their ingenuity. And that's really what team objectives are designed to do. Now, there's a lot to team objectives in a good product company. So it's one of those things that sounds simple conceptually, but there's nuance there. And so this is a big section in the book. It talks about how we assign work to teams, how we let teams collaborate, the different ways of collaborating, how we manage high integrity commitments, how we place bets at different levels of ambition, different, you know, put more money on this team solving this problem and less maybe on this team. And what does it even mean to be accountable? These are the kinds of questions that are really important to understand if you want to empower your teams. Avid, I actually profiled, many of you know from Inspired, I profiled 6 product managers that I thought, I mean, I was lucky enough to know for many years, and I thought they were awesome. And they were, you know, product managers where nobody knew them. They just knew the founders of these successful companies. And like the original product manager of Netflix, the original product manager of Google AdWords. I wanted to tell their stories and show, like, it's not an accident that those products were awesome. They had a serious product manager there. In this book, since the book is focused on leaders, I decided to focus on 8 product leaders: 2 leaders of product, 2 leaders of design, 2 leaders of engineering, and 2 leaders of companies. They are all of them, I think, people you have not heard of. Maybe you've heard of 1 or 2, depends. But behind the scenes were like the people that made it happen. And so Avid is one of them. She's based in London. I tell the whole, you know, sort of their leadership style and interview them in the book. But yeah, she's right on here. Leaders should articulate what needs to be done and why. And the why is really the context here, and let the team decide how best to do it. That's just the common theme you will find in all of these good companies. All right, I want to try to tie all these concepts together. These are all, each one of these is a serious, complex, nuanced topic in its own right, but it's also not rocket science. These things sort of fit together in a logical way. They've been together for a long time. The idea here is our product vision, of course, is describing the future you are trying to create 5 years out. The team topology gets to how are we going to structure our product teams in order to do that. The product strategy is what helps us decide which particular problems we need to solve. The team objectives are how we assign those problems to the product teams. Product discovery, of course, once you've assigned a problem, an objective to a product team, product discovery is basically how they figure out a solution that's worth building, valuable, usable, feasible, viable. And then product delivery is how they build that solution and take it to market. Those are the six main concepts in a product organization. Now, product leaders and managers of product design and engineering, are mostly concerned about vision, topology, strategy, and assigning the objectives. Product teams, the product managers, designers, and engineers, are focused on discovery and delivery. That's how we fit together. All right, there's one other point I really wanted to make. And you know what? Especially Dan, I think, can appreciate this. I might be wrong. Dan's got a better memory on stuff like this, but I think at the last meetup in Mountain View at Intuit's offices, I remember getting a question. I'm not sure it was at your meetup, Dan, but I think it was. But we got a question, and there was a leader who was feeling bad because she said she didn't know how to please all her stakeholders. She's like, it's a no-win situation. And I remember hearing that and thinking, well, first of all, don't even try. That's not your job to please the stakeholders. And I remember thinking of this quote because I hadn't heard of it for a while, but I remember I put it in here, the Steve Jobs quote, because I think this applies to product leaders. Beautiful. If you want to make everybody happy, don't be a product leader. Sell ice cream, right? Product leadership job. Now, of course, we don't want to be a jerk. We don't want to just be capricious or arbitrary. What we want to do is be very transparent. But the truth is, if you're doing your job as a product leader and you really do a well-informed, data-driven product strategy, not everybody's going to get what they want. That's the reality. Not everybody's going to get what they want. But if you've done your job well, we'll all have a job next year. I mean, the company will continue to thrive, or we'll turn it around if it needs to. So you need to realize it's a harder job. It's not about making everybody happy. So I just want to point that out because, yes, product leadership is a hard job, and it's not one of those jobs where everybody's going to love you. I mean, I've just never seen that. I have seen product leaders which are truly adored afterwards. Christian is a good example. He completely turned around his last two companies. And I will tell you, there were a lot of people, especially in the sales organization, that were very, for a while, very unhappy because they were used to getting their way, even though the results were not good. And then somebody comes along and says, I respect what you do, and my goal is to make you successful. You're going to have to trust me that I'm going to make some good calls here. And he did. I've got lots of examples of that. But, behind every great company, you will find a leader that's willing to make these calls. So, yeah, it's a hard job for sure. All right. Let me just see. We're just ready to turn this over for Q&A. But in terms of Inspired, Inspired is aimed at product teams, product managers, designers, and engineers, especially product managers, on how teams solve hard problems. And Empowered is really aimed at the leaders, the managers and leaders of product management, product design, and engineering, and at least in medium size and smaller companies, the CEO, founders. So that's who it's for, and that's meant to really do hopefully a good job describing in considerable depth what we've just talked about for the last 45 minutes or so. So yeah, and a lot of articles. Many of you know that's the way I write, is I kind of write a topic at a time. It's a sort of an MVP for that topic. I'll put it on the blog, and based on the feedback I get and the questions I get, the good ones turn into chapters. So that's sort of the process. All right, Dan, let me stop my share here.
Well, thank you so much, Marty. I'm going to get in here. Actually, you know what? Let me get in here because we usually take a picture at our meetup. So we're going to have to take a selfie this way. Not quite the same, but not quite the same. But you want to hold your book up? Can you hold up? I don't have a physical copy yet. It just came out. I'm waiting. Here we go. All right, let's hold it up in the picture. Nice. All right, 1, 2, 3. Oh, a little over. Cool. There you go. Awesome, man. Cool. So great. Very cool. Thank you, Marty, for an awesome talk.
Thanks again for arranging everything as usual.
No, my pleasure, man. It was awesome. Thank you for making the time. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye.